Hey friends, tonight we're keeping it slow and simple. What time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? Dim the lights, lie back, maybe let a small fan whisper in the corner. It's cold in the stone room, and the lantern is steady. You breathe, and the past opens like a door. You wake up in a granary north of Beijing, late in the Ming dynasty. The floor is tamped earth. The posts smell of soy smoke and ash. On the packed shelves sit cloth sacks sealed with clay and twine. The characters brushed on their sides say jiangmi, glutinous rice. It is out of place here in the dry north, a southern crop ferried up canals and roads. Rice is not the daily bowl of these hills, millet and noodles are. That is why each sack carries the quiet weight of purpose. The clerk with the bamboo tally slips keeps counting. He is measuring in shi and du, old volumes that move food more than they measure it. Beijing's households and garrisons have eaten from the Grand Canal since the early Ming, and the Great Wall's stronger stretches lean, indirectly, on those same shipments. Rice travels from Jiangnan, steady as the seasons, partners with salt and iron on barges that creak through silt-brown water. Some of it will be cooked, some of it will not. Glutinous rice is odd. It is not sweeter, only stickier, packed with amylopectin starch that turns heat and water into a patient, clinging gel. In this room, 2 kettles hiss. One kettle boils rice into congee for the work crew, a thin, useful breakfast with a pinch of salt and chopped greens when available. The other kettle cooks rice far past taste, breaking grain into liquid. A boy lifts the lid, and the steam smells like porridge and paste. Outside, lime slakes in a trough. The mason calls it snow ash, a powder burned from limestone and shells, then soaked until it quiets. The day's mixing is slow, almost tender. The cooked rice broth, glossy, thick, faintly sweet, pours into the lime. Sand follows. What results does not look like history. It looks like pale mud that remembers where you press it. But when it dries, that mud grabs stone harder than lime alone. Later centuries will test old joints and find the fingerprints of rice in the mortar. You run a palm over brick. Grain of sand nicks your skin. The brick is Ming, tight-fired, stamped with the mark of the yard that burned it. Stone and brick need a binder that survives both summer storms and the thud of hooves. The sticky rice lime mortar does that. It is water-resistant, it sets again after rain. When frost claws, it hangs on. The masons learned by practice and report. Some records mention strong mortar, others just list rice among supplies and leave the rest to the craftsman's hand. The oddity is not just technical, it is moral, logistical. Food has been turned into wall. Glutinous rice is expensive in the north. A bowl in a worker's hand can calm a morning. In the trough, the same rice holds a parapet against the wind. The quartermaster's job is to balance stomach and stone. He watches the head count of laborers and guards, the length of curtain wall, the kiln's pace, seasons, storms, and the canal's level. A flood far south can stall a parapet here. Winter, the crew eats millet joe most mornings, thin, hot, uncomplicated. At midday, a bing, a flat bread of wheat or mixed flours, sometimes rubbed with garlic or salted greens. Dried tofu appears often, sliced into soups, because soy keeps better as curd than as bean under a watchtower roof. Douche fermented black soybeans salts a pot and makes it feel like there was meat. There is not much meat. Occasionally, a pickled fish cart arrives from the coast, the barrels tight with brine and smell. Weeks later, the smell still clings to timbers. But rice in this story is a tool before it is a treat. The crew knows the difference between jiangmi in a bowl and in a wall. They have sayings about it. The stew line jokes that the masons eat like scholars on festival days. The masons reply that the stew would spill if the wall did not grip. A small wooden scoop hangs by the trough, stained beige from daily use. The boy stirs the pot and does not scorch it, because burnt sugars weaken the set. Countless tiny kitchens and hands make one long line of stone. You walk the work face. On one side, the parapet tooth rises, merlons and embrasures. On the other, a ramp gathers bricks from muleback to hand. Work songs move in time. The air tastes chalky and of breakfast. You can see, if you pay attention, how the mortar lays thin, thinner than in some other places, because good mortar is strong in a film when the bricks are true. Here, the sticky rice lets narrow joints cling like skin. Less is more when the recipe is right. At noon, a clerk writes a note. 2 more sacks of jiangmi requested from the city storehouse within 10 days. The ink dries on cheap paper. The city keeps many storehouses, for grain tax, for salt, for rations. The canal arrives with rice. Carts roll it north on ridge roads toward passes like Juyong and Shanghai. Every axle splits the same decision: eat it or build with it. A cook, a mason, a clerk, and a captain each argue a little case in their heads. Winter is long, stones are patient. People are not. In the evening, the granary cools. An old kettle breathes on the brazier, and in the corridor you hear a guard tap the hour board. The boy who stirred the rice is curled by the warm brick, dreaming, perhaps, of steamed cakes he will not taste this month. Tomorrow he will stir again, and the trough will take another ladle. No one will applaud. The mortar joint, once set, will vanish into the pale seam between bricks, quiet as breath. Small choices, repeated daily, grow into walls and winters here. How much of a wall is food, and who, on a lean winter, decides whether the next sack warms a bowl or binds a stone? Morning returns to the granary, and the rhythm clarifies. You stand at the threshold where food becomes material and numbers become edges. The clerk's abacus cracks softly as he tallies rice, lime, and sand. Behind those beads lies the grain transport, the Kaoyun. Barges push north along the Grand Canal from Jiangnan, the lower Yangtze of Paddies and Mulberry. Stevedores move sacks across gangplanks. Carters take them up ridge roads toward passes like Juyong and Shanghai. 1,000 small shoulders make it move. You walk the steps slowly because slowness is the truth of how things are built. Rice set aside for mortar is cooked to collapse in copper kettles. The liquid is strained through cloth into a smooth starch liquor. Lime is slaked in advance and left to mellow. Older masons swear the patience of lime is the patience of a wall. Sand is screened by hand. The trough is wooden and darkened by years of use. When the rice liquor slides into the putty, a hush settles, milk turns to cream, to paste, then to intention. Ratios live in people more than in books. A foreman says, thin like gruel, and the apprentice knows the viscosity he means. Sand stiffens the mix. Thin joints are buttered with a trowel edge. Bricks are tapped into line with a mallet wrapped in cloth. This is not magic. It is repetition learned under weather and watch. Step back and you see why the Ming turned to bricks and binders. Earlier lines were rammed earth, quick to raise with baskets, quick to suffer from rain and wind. In the 15th and 16th centuries, kilns multiplied near strategic passes. Standard sizes allowed faster stacking, quicker counting, tighter joints. Mortar quality became the difference between a facade that shivered apart and a curtain that outlasted a winter. Rice's role hides inside that difference. Amylopectin, the branching starch abundant in glutinous rice, threads the lime matrix as it cures. When water presses, the composite resists softening. When frost pries, the joint flexes a little and holds. Foremen reserve the good mix for wet gullies and steep faces. On sheltered runs they lay plain lime. There is thrift here and triage. The decision to root rice into mortar rather than bowls is not made only on the wall. It is made in the capital, where officials weigh the safety of an emperor's city against the temper of his subjects. In good harvest years, the choice is quiet. In lean years, it can sound like a quarrel. The north leans on southern shipments. One flood in the Huai Basin can make a winter thin around Beijing. Each season writes an ethic in small acts. An extra ladle for the crew that holds stone. A tighter pour in the trough when a stair must keep its edge. Follow the rice upstream in your mind. In Jiangnan, a tenant goes ankle-deep among chutes, spreading pond-mild water with his hands. Harvesters bind sheaves and stack them under rafters darkened by smoke. Some fraction of that abundance becomes mortar in a northern wall you touch only as a story. A line of exchange ties the empire together more than any single rampart does. Other recipes exist. Lime and tung oil make a putty that shrugs off rain along rooflines. Some ledgers list egg beaten into lime for special tiles. Rice endures because it is warehoused at scale, measured in volumes the state already understands, and it behaves predictably when boiled to starch. It is not a secret so much as a convention, like a tailor reaching for the same strong thread. Soldiers behind the parapet taste this policy, even if they never read it. Breakfast tells them the quartermaster's nerve. On a generous morning, the millet porridge is thicker, with chopped pickled greens. On a thin morning, the ladle scrapes metal. Men eat in silence, warm hands at the brazier, then patrol the same steps between crenels, stamping the same snow from their boots. Midday, a captain rides along the ramp, his horse snorting steam. He asks to see the kiln yard as well as the wall. Bricks are stacked like books. Many bear stamps from their yards of origin, a habit both practical and blame-seeking. If a run fails, the mark names the maker. He weighs a brick and nods. He will report that standard is kept, and that reserves will hold a month if the canal flows. Farther along, a mason pries a joint open on purpose and shows you the core, faintly sweet to the nose, pale and tight. Rain has come and gone all season, and yet the seam is whole. He points to a length done in plain lime the year before. It seems hairlining where winter gripped and spring let go. Stone remembers what we feed it, he says, and closes the joint again. Outside this rhythm, the century moves. Generals reorganize troops. A celebrated commander in the northeast insists on brick towers and deeper moats. Work crews are drilled between hall and meal. Tax policy slides from grain to silver under reformers, and quartermasters translate again, coin into grain into mortar. In one stretch, locks need dredging and rice slows. Elsewhere, a new warehouse opens closer to a pass, and the carts creak a little less. Toward evening, steam and chalk scent the rafters. The boy who tends the kettles has learned to skim foam and never scorch. He can tell by smell when the starch liquor is right. He sleeps easily because he has made something that will outlast him, though he would not say it that way. The wall takes the day without ceremony and grows by a brick's height, which is how empires move when they are careful, almost invisibly. Under your palm tonight is a compound of hunger, habit, and lime. If the canal falters this winter and the sacks arrive late, which thins first, the bowls or the mortar? Snow comes hard and sideways one night, and you hear the wall change pitch. At the granary, the clerk shuts the ledger. The canal has stalled under ice. The last wagons reach the pass at dusk. In the yard, the boy huddles by the kettles and keeps the starch liquor from catching. Rice feels precious, lime stays calm. Morning inspection begins in steps and silences. A stair spur on the north face has shed a run of bricks. Water threaded the joints and froze. The captain walks the parapet and reads the wall like a page. Hairline here, bulge there, a place where water collects. The foreman divides the crew. One pair sets a canvas windbreak. Another opens a drain so the next storm has somewhere to go. Nothing heroic, just patience. Today, the ration calculation resolves into action. Bowls thin by a finger, kettles for mortar stay full. Discomfort travels down the line, then settles. No one calls it policy. The foreman looks at the crumbled stair and the exposed run that guards nearby fields, and he keeps rice flowing to the trough. Sand warms by a brazier, bricks stay under canvas, trowels are wiped between lifts. The good mortar spreads like a breath across cold brick, pressed thin and even. You watch the joint knit in winter air. The mason teaches the tricks. Lay with the wind at your back. Keep your water covered so ice can't glaze the pail. Cheat nothing. Winter remembers everything. Work slows but does not stop. The stair rises again. One day's patching becomes a week of tending. Food arrives from the village, quietly, to replace the bowls that were thinned. A farmer's wife brings pickled mustard greens and millet cakes that taste of hearth smoke. She asks only whether the drainage will keep the path passable when the melt comes. The captain nods. The boy slips her a ladle of hot porridge before anyone notices. At night, the brick faces gleam faintly in starlight. You run your fingertips along fresh joints and feel a strength more polite than stone, discipline given material form. The masons talk about other stretches, ledges that failed under plain lime, towers that still take the wind because rice keeps their seams from drinking. It is a willingness to spend calories on longevity. Spring runs its errands. Ice loosens on the canal and grain barges nose north. With them come rumors, generals shifted, a clerk dismissed for pilfering rice. The wall ignores all of it. The repaired stair holds. The parapet sheds rain without streaking. Weeds try to root and mostly fail, finding no powdery mortar. You sweep the walk with a wicker broom and knock dust into the lee. Years repeat until they turn to biography. The boy grows into a man who can judge starch liquor by shine alone. The foreman's hand stiffens, but he still spreads a joint no thicker than a coin edge. The captain retires and keeps walking out at dusk to watch the wall purple against the horizon. The clerk teaches another to tally. No one writes their names on the parapet. The work is signature enough. Elsewhere along the northern line, other recipes keep arguing with time. Rammed earth stretches stand when buttressed and crowned. Brick and stone curtains dominate at passes and ridges. Watchtowers of mixed fabric work until a seam drinks once too often and opens. Centuries later, scholars chip a pebble from a Ming joint, dissolve its paste, and find amylopectin, proof that glutinous rice threaded these crystals. Conservators cook rice in lab pots. Tests compare cubes of plain lime, modern cement, and sticky rice lime. The rice composite cures slower than cement, but keeps strength in soak cycles that powder ordinary lime. Immersion hardly swells it. Freeze, thaw leaves only hairlines. Conservators write ratios, 1 part slaked lime putty to about 1 part rice liquor by volume, sand to taste, strain out skins. Some experiment with sorghum or wheat paste and find them weaker. A few argue it is wasteful to cook food for masonry today. Others answer that the recipe itself is part of the artifact, a continuity of practice. Authenticity often wins when fabric must endure harsh weather. Modern visitors sometimes run a palm along a parapet and say the wall feels alive. What you are feeling is a social choice fossilized. Farmers labor in Jiangnan paddies, grain lifted from boats in the capital, lime burned in hillside kilns, carts pulled through passes, bowls thinned on cold mornings, kettles watched by boys who learned not to scorch, every decision concentrated into a seam thinner than your little finger. Walls mostly remember cooks. Stand very near and history becomes a temperature, a texture, a smell, the cool of brick at dawn, the faint sweetness in a wet joint, the rasp of sand under a trowel. The famous thing is a composite of unfamous habits. Warfare created urgency, logistics created possibility, kitchen practice created durability. It is not romantic, it is steady, boring enough to last. One afternoon, you notice an old repair line, just slightly different in tone, marching diagonally across a tower's face. It records a forgotten storm. No plaque explains it. The line is the plaque. You think about the lives that intersected that seam, the mason, the woman with greens, the captain who signed for sacks, the boy who stirred. Their choices hold your weight while you look north into weather you cannot see coming. A question lingers as the day closes. How much of our world is held together by food we never taste, patience we never praise, and hands we never name? The wall does not answer. It keeps its edge against the wind and carries your quiet along a long, pale line until the light goes thin and blue, and you walk back toward the granary, listening to the mortar breathe as it cools. Story 2, Millet Porridge and Frontier Dust, Feeding Han Watchtowers. You wake to grit on your teeth and the soft thud of a pestle in a wooden mortar. Dawn in the hexy corridor is the color of ash water, and wind licks the edges of the beacon tower. A cook squats by an earthen stove, coaxing a low flame from dried reed stems and sheep dung. In a bronze cauldron, foxtail millet swells into joe, porridge, thin enough to pour, thick enough to remember the ladle. The frontier under the Han is a braid of towers, palisades, and stations bound by routine. You feel that routine in your stomach more than in your feet. Rations travel as numbers first, millet counted by who and do, then arrive as sacks who seem shed chaff like sand. Before the grain can become breakfast, it must be pounded to loosen husks, winnowed in a shallow basket, rinsed until the water clears. The sound of washing is the day's most civilized thing. Millet is practical in a way that matters this far from orchards and markets. It matures quickly, keeps well, cooks fast. A soldier can chew parched kernels on a march. A cook can turn it liquid for the feverish. Its blandness is a canvas for whatever the stores can spare. A pinch of salt from the state monopoly, a smear of fermented soybean paste, douche, brined black beans, mashed and stirred at the last moment to perfume the steam with something like meat's memory. The watchtower Yantai stands on tamped earth, its ladder rubbed smooth by the same hands every week. By day smoke signals, by night fire. Fuel is a supply as real as grain. Brushwood is scarce, dung burns longer and steadier when dried under eaves. A detail stacks cakes for the signal brazier, another fills water jars from a shallow well lined with wicker and stone. On a table of split boards, a scribe copies yesterday's allotments to a wooden slip, his brush the only soft object for miles. You eat holding your bowl with both hands. The porridge carries a faint nuttiness. Somebody saved a pinch of broomcorn millet and mixed it in. On generous days, there is a ragged strip of dried mutton and a handful of pickled mustard greens whose vinegar brightens the mouth and stills a cough. On lean days, the joe is clear enough to see the bottom of the bowl. You learn quickly to read policy by the thickness of breakfast. Food here is an argument between distance and time. Carts grind westward from commanderies, their axles speaking in a dry voice. Farther west, Tuncheon military farm colonies dot the oases, soldiers turned farmers in orderly rectangles of watered land. In spring, some men stand guard while others push seed into furrows. In summer, they swap. Grain grown by garrison hands smooths the convoy's stutter, softens the reliance on tax stores. It is boring work, which is why it keeps you alive. Vinegar, salt, and paste make the difference between sick and steady. Fresh greens are scarce in winter, so vegetables are shredded in autumn, salted in crocks, weighed with stones. When the crocks are opened, the tower smells briefly of gardens and river towns. The pickling liquid is saved to season soups. Nothing is wasted so far from orchards. A strip of dried radish in hot millet tastes like prudence. Debate lives far away on bamboo and silk. In the capital, scholars once argued iron and salt with ministers, whether the state should grip monopolies to fund armies and walls. The frontier hears the echo as measured salt rations and iron tools stamped with official marks. Your spoon is iron, your pick is iron, your bowl is clay thrown by someone with steady wrists. Policies touch mouths when they decide how many dew of grain a man receives in winter. Water has its own ledger. The well yields enough if the draw is paced. A ditch cut last year dribbles toward the garrison fields. Jars are sealed with braided grass and clay lids against dust. In a dry month, you taste the well in the porridge, a mineral edge, a memory of limestone and the long fingers of roots. Boiling changes the smell of the room. Steam adds a softness to the air that fleece cloaks cannot. At noon, the bowl changes shape. Morning Joe becomes a firmer mash in the afternoon, stirred and turned onto a board to cool, then sliced with a thin knife into cakes that travel better than soup. A jug of sour millet ale, faint and safe to drink, stands in the shade. Men take sips without ceremony. Wheat exists here too, and barley, but millet owns the schedule because it forgives mediocre soil and a distracted cook. Signals eat food in their own way. A practice day means an extra armload of dung for the brazier, a handful more porridge for the crew that climbs and tends the smoke. On days when riders bring rumors, Chengnu seen beyond a ridge, a caravan overdue. The signal team hovers near the ladder, bowls balanced on their knees, and the fire stack is built in layers like bread. You learn to hang hunger on a nail and move when the horn calls. None of this is glamorous, and that is the point. Shoes are patched with rawhide thongs. A spare pair hangs above the stove where smoke can keep insects out of the seams. The cook's hands are mapped with small burns in the places where steam escapes the cauldron lid. He knows how to judge millet by sound, the duller thump of kernels that have drunk enough water, the whisper when the grains are almost done and the first starch releases. He keeps back a little brine for tomorrow. Habit is security. Records from these edges are plain. Wooden slips found in old sands list an archer's name, the span of his watch, the issue of a cloak, the penalty for a missed patrol, the number of shung of millet he drew that month. You might find your life there reduced to strokes of ink, one man, one bow, one bowl, one signal at dusk. The slips never say whether the porridge was thick that day, only that it existed, scheduled and counted. When a caravan arrives, it changes the taste of everything for 3 days. Dates from the west, a cone of pressed salt, rough cloth. If someone in the column trades dried apricots for a soldier's spare arrowhead, the porridge becomes a celebration. You chew slowly, seed-sweet cutting through starch. Then the fruit is gone, and the road sound returns to its old rhythm, wagons clicking like beetles across packed earth. Evenings fall thin and long. A ladle taps the rim of the pot to call stragglers. The tower's shadow points toward the desert where the sky is a violet bowl. Men sit with their backs to the leeward wall, bowls on their knees, the wind combing their hair in one direction. Someone tells the same story he told last week because it filled the time then and will again. The story ends the way porridge ends, with a scrape and a nod. You go to sleep with the day's grain still a warmth in your stomach, the taste of salt at the back of your tongue, and your mind counting the steps from cot to ladder in case the horn sounds. Tomorrow morning the mortar will fall, the water will cloud, the pestle will thud, and the pot will breathe again. The routine will put its arms around you and not let go. Out here, where distance is the first enemy, can a bowl of something bland and hot do more to hold a line than any speech or bronze seal? By late morning, the wind has set its teeth, and you are counting time by chores. The pestle thuds again, softer now, because the cook is pounding just enough millet to thicken the noon pot. He hums an old field song from a wetter province, and it sounds like rain you will not see this month. You rinse bowls with hot water, catch the steam on your face, and feel civilization in the simple act of heat meeting clay. The routine widens as you look beyond the tower. Downslope, rectangles of garrison fields stitched toward a dry riverbed. This is Tuntian work, soldier farmers making grain where convoys cannot always be trusted to arrive. The pattern dates to the reign of Emperor Wu. Generals learned that horses and men eat more predictably than politics behaves, and so they pressed spades into hard earth. Zhao Chongguo once argued for patience on the frontier, more ditches and fewer heroic marches, and you sense his prudence in every furrow. Water is coaxed from a diversion notch cut into the stream's bank. When snowmelt is generous, the ditches shine. When melt is stingy, buckets and patience carry the difference. Seed choices are a kind of weatherproofing. Foxtail millet for speed, broomcorn for drought, a little barley in the lower corners where soil stays moist. Wheat can thrive, but it asks the cook for more time and the soil for more kindness. Millet forgives. You learn to read fields the way you read faces. Green comes like a held breath released. Yellow means a harvest plan. Gray means a harder winter. Food economies multiply without anyone namming them. The state grain that rumbles west in wagons, the official bingliang, is rationed by slip and seal. The field grain delivered in straw baskets is rationed by promise and habit. Then there is the most local market of all. Men differ in appetite and generosity. A pack of dates from a caravan appears, and for a day, every bowl is brighter. A strip of dried mutton traded from a herdsman is sliced so thin it almost becomes seasoning, but everyone swears it changes the porridge. On very rare days, a skin of fermented mare's milk makes the rounds, sour as a new idea. Some gag, others grin, and the tower acquires a story to tell on colder nights. Preservation keeps the calendar from eating you. When autumn falters into frost, radishes are shredded and salted, greens are packed with vinegar, and jars are sealed with clay and grass ropes. Dried scallions hang above the stove like a promise of spring. In winter, the cook drops a fist of pickle into the pot at the last moment, preserving its bite. You watch men sit up a little straighter because sourness makes the mouth water. That small reflex eases swallowing, eases thinking, eases a day. Wooden slips hold the frontier's memory in a tight hand. A scribe scratches your name, your watch, the issue of a cloak, the weight of a week's grain. From places like Juyong, centuries later, people will read these slips and imagine your breath in the cold. The slips are interested in order, not flavor. They note that you drew so many shung this 10-day, that a pair of boots was repaired, that someone was fined for losing an arrowhead. The porridge's thickness, the jar's vinegar, the day the pestle sounded tired. None of that survives except as strength held in your shoulders. Midday brings a second kind of cooking. The morning joe becomes a dense mash stirred until it leaves the sides of the pot clean, then spread on a board to cool and sliced into cakes. In the afternoon, you can hold a square in your hand while you count the steps up the ladder. A jug of thin, safe ale watches in the shade, poured in sips that never quite become a mood. Your mouth knows the line between enough and too much. There are signals to tend. The beacon brazier eats as steadily as men do. Dried dung cakes burn slow and sure. Reeds catch fast to start the stack. Some towers pack the fire with damp brush to thicken smoke for practice signals. The captain drills the crew, 1 column for riders sighted, 2 for a large group, 3 for contact. The code is older than you, flexible enough to travel across winds. On drill days, bowls are a little fuller for the ladder team. The economy of calories is also an economy of attention. You fix small things because small things stay fixed. Boots are mended with rawhide thongs warmed over steam to soften. Bowstrings are rubbed with a smear of fat saved from a rare stew. The cook grinds a pinch of salt and mustard seed together to make a paste for a man with a stubborn cough. The medic uses ashes boiled with vinegar to wash a scabbed cut. None of this feels like strategy until the day you realize you are not sick, your boots did not split in the cold, and your bow did not fray when you needed it. Boredom is a tool. Dispatches carry larger debates as shadows. In the capital, scholars once argued at length about salt and iron, and whether monopolies make frontiers strong or brittle. Out here, you taste their decision as measured pinches from a stamped cone of salt and a hammerhead that bears an official mark. You do not bother to curse or praise, you simply cook and eat and walk your watch. At dusk, the tower turns into a clock. The day divides into jeng, night watches struck on a drum or a clapper. A man dozes with his bowl against his chest and wakes to climb, the rhythm so old it feels like the body's second heartbeat. On the platform, wind strips words down to gestures. You point, you nod, you lift the signal lid, you look for mirrors of fire along the line. Hunger sleeps when the horn speaks, then wakes gently when the brazier settles and bowls reappear. Once a convoy arrives late and thin. Axles squeal, the sacks are fewer, and the captain's face goes quiet. For a 10-day, the cook stretches porridge with more water and an extra handful of pickled greens. It is transparent kindness. No one complains because there is nothing to say. Men tie their belts tighter and watch the ditch levels as if prayer were a measurement. Then snowmelt returns like a bureaucrat's signature, slow, necessary, and carts roll again. You taste relief in the extra ladle long before anyone mentions policy. By the time night grows long, you can navigate the tower by scent and texture. Warm iron near the stove, dry dung near the ladder, the faint vinegar that lives in the wood of the cutting board. Your hands remember the bowl rim's imperfections and avoid the chip without thinking. The body takes in these details and stores them where bravery would go if there were any to spare. And under it all, the same question measures itself out with the grain. On a border where distance frays orders and weather edits plans, does the steady, almost flavorless bowl do more for the empire's line than any edict inked 1,000 li away? The alarm comes on a day that smells of hot iron and vinegar. A rider from the east crests the low ridge, horse dark with lather, and the signal captain lifts his arm before the words arrive. The ladder goes light under your feet. Dried dung cakes thud into the brazier. One column of smoke climbs, then two, then three, stacked with reeds to turn grey into a thick, legible pillar. Far towers answer, little commas on the horizon. You swallow once and taste the morning's porridge as if it had been strategy. The cook had thickened it, half a scoop more millet, a fist of pickled radish. It sits warm behind your ribs as you swing the shovel into place. Starch keeps hands from shaking. Habit keeps breath even. The captain says nothing you haven't heard in drill. The economy of boredom pays its dividend now. The rider catches his breath and speaks between gulps of water. A small band, fast ponies, probing. Not a siege, never a siege, just the sort of test that tries the gaps between towers. The captain nods, sends 2 men down the ditch line to check the low spot where flood cut the bank last spring. You go with them, counting steps and stones. The ditch holds. Its water is a slow brown idea keeping fields alive. Back at the tower, a spare pot goes on the stove. Even in alarm, the cook thinks ahead, Joe for after, when men come down from the ladder with mouths like sand. A handful of douche goes into the pot for smell alone, the promise of savor when tongues remember to work. A square of noon cake cools on a board, ready to travel a pocket if the captain needs a patrol to range west. Signals settle into rhythm. Smoke columns on distant bluffs align with the code you know in your sleep. A courier heads toward the commandery office, another toward the next garrison with fresh horses. You feel the chains stretch and hum, the same chain that brings salt, iron, and millet. It carries news with the same stubborn insistence. The raiders are seen briefly, specks, a dust flag, then nothing. The towers talk them along with smoke. A patrol slips out with shields and bows, not to chase but to watch. This is the part outsiders call anticlimax. No heroics, no clash of bronze. The most important fact is ordinary. The alarm rose, was answered, and folded back into routine without tearing the day. You climb down when the captain nods. The brazier is capped. Ash is banked for later. Men drink in turns, one slow bowl at a time, because plenty is packing as much as supply. The cook salts the porridge carefully. Sweat and fear are both thieves of taste. Someone laughs a little too hard at a soft joke, and the sound jerks the tower back into its old proportions. Afternoon chores resume with the precision of superstition. Bowstrings get rubbed, a boot seam is checked, the ditch bank is tamped where prints show a curious hoof. The captain reads a wooden slip like weather, reinforcement promised within 5 days, winter rations to be reviewed, a reminder that lost tools are fined at twice their value. He tucks it away and looks at the fields as if reading a second, more honest dispatch. Harvest comes anyway. Millet heads turn from green to dull gold. Men whose hands know ladders, know sickles and twine with equal competence. The smell in the tower shifts from cooked starch to drying straw. Bundles stack in shadow, rats test the walls and fail. Some grain goes to the state granary by rule, some to the garrison store by need, some to bowls by consent. A basket to the cook is an investment disguised as gratitude. Winter teaches its old grammar again. The porridge thins and thickens with policy and weather. Dried greens open like ideas in hot water. A cough moves through the barracks and is managed with vinegar, steam, and rest. The signal code is drilled by lamplight on a plank with charcoal marks. 1, 2, 3, repeat. 1, 2, wait. 3, confirm. Your fingers learn to count without you. Years stack like bowls. Men rotate out, leaving their iron spoons to younger hands. A new captain arrives with a thicker beard and the same ledger. The Tuncheon plots creep one furrow farther each spring. The ditch deepens by a hand. A new stone buttress keeps the bank from slumping. You realize that courage here is not an act but a schedule. Empires seldom fall for lack of speeches. They fall when the pot burns and no one stirs. When the tower finally empties, decades later, perhaps centuries, the desert gets to work. Sand finds the doorway. The ladder breaks at the third rung. Jars crack and their lips hold dust. But the dryness is kind to memory in its way. In the 20th century, diggers will find wooden slips at places like Juyong, letters and receipts still legible because the air forgot to rot them. They will find records of millet issues, of cloak allotments, of men fined for lost arrowheads, of someone's complaint about a thin ration in the 9th month. They will find desiccated grains in a jar's corner and a spoon with an iron tang worn, polished by a thumb. They will read your quiet life without knowing your face. Historians will argue about policy and frontier strategy, about Qingnu confederations and court factions. They will be right to argue, yet the line held as much by routine as by command, by porridge as by plans. Nutritional monotony protected bow arms, vinegar protected gums, heat protected gut, pickles protected sanity. The watchtower was a kitchen with a code on top. Modern soldiers heat packets and stir noodles in kettles that click and hum. Aid workers boil unsafe water into safety on camp stoves. Office workers cradle a paper cup of instant oats at dawn in a high-rise and call it breakfast. The bowl still draws a boundary around a bit of the day and says, here, for a moment, things will be predictable. You can still feel the frontier in your mouth if you close your eyes. Steam, salt, a faint bitterness, the softness of grain surrendered to water. You can still hear the pestle, the brush on wood, the ladder under feet, the fire breathing under a cap of dung. The tower never asked for glory. It asked for attention paid on time. In the end, the frontier wasn't won. It was maintained, measured out in shung and dew, in watches and bowls, in smoke and steam, until the calendar turned and someone else's ledger took its place. That sort of victory leaves few statues. It leaves habits that feel like weather and seams in the earth where ditches once ran. If history remembers empires by their walls and wars, who will make a place in the story for the bland bowl that kept men patient, and what else in our own lives waits quietly, like porridge, doing the most important work while no one is looking. Story 3, Tea Bricks and Bitter Marches, Caffeine on the Northern Line. You wake to the creak of pack saddles and the smell of wet wool. It is barely light at the Dartung garrison gate, and the quartermaster has laid 3 rectangles on the table that look like roof tiles. They are tea bricks, juancha pressed from dark leaves, stamped with shallow patterns, wrapped in bamboo sheath. Their edges are chipped from travel. They feel more like building material than something to drink, and that is exactly why the army likes them. They do not spill, they do not spoil easily, and a day's ration can be counted in slabs. Frontier tea is an economy you can hold. From Sichuan's Yan and Hubei's hills, caravans push north and west, their pace the same as a walk with a little stubbornness added. The state maintains tea and horse offices, Cha Ma Si, because cavalry is only as strong as the horses under it, and good step horses come dear. Tea trades for horseflesh and hay, for felt and information, and it also travels onward to garrisons, where it is treated as both comfort and supply. You watch a clerk scrape the brick's face with a short knife. Curls fall like bark. The kettle does the frontier's best medicine before breakfast. It boils. Boiled water is the quiet victory in these latitudes, a daily truce with stomachs. Into the rolling water go a handful of scraped tea, a pinch of salt because the North drinks tea that way, and on better weeks, a splash of milk from a herder's trade. Today the pot is plain tea, water, a little salt, which makes a bracing liquor that stains the ladle brown. No one sips for flavor. They drink for waking, for warmth, and for the slight, disciplined climb of attention up the back of the skull. Brick tea is made for transport. Leaves are steamed, pounded, pressed into molds, dried until they ring when tapped. Stamps show origin and tax marks. Some bricks are for tribute, some for market, some for barter in places where silver is theory and tea is habit. You learn to read weight by feel, to knock a brick, and listen for the tight tone of a good press. A cracked brick still makes a pot. A damp brick is a small despair, saved only by slicing away the softened face and drying the rest above a stove. At the garrison, the routine is simple enough to be doctrine. Before dawn, one pot for the sentry post, strong, dark, almost tar in color, poured into small bowls and taken like a password. Later, a milder brew for the men coming off night patrol, with a sliver of hard sugar if a caravan sold some cubes last month. By noon, a third pot simmers thinly to keep the mouth wet and the talk level. In winter, a few grains of roasted millet sometimes go into the pot to round the bitterness. In summer, the brew runs a shade lighter to stretch the brick a day longer. Out on the march, tea turns into logistics. The officer's kit includes a small iron kettle blackened to a sheen, a tinder pouch, and a strip of tea wrapped in oil paper. Men carry shared bricks in a saddlebag with the biscuits, the salt cone, and the small knife that serves as both ration key and repair tool. Halt at a stream, and the first command, even before horses are watered, is fire. Strips of tea go in, and then bowls pass. The first swallow scalds the tongue, and with it goes the taste of dust and an hour of weariness. It is a substitute for meat and a postponement of sleep. You watch a trade morning at the wall gate and see why tea is coin where money would argue. A herdsman comes in with felt and tailies. He wants salt, needles, and a promise. The clerk weighs salt on a small beam, counts out a handful of iron arrowheads stamped with an official mark, and adds half a tea brick. The man smiles because he can drink value slowly and share it without dividing it to copper dust. Currencies are not only metals, they are also customs that keep their edge in rain. The tea horse offices matter more than their ledgers suggest. In some reigns they are strict monopolies, in others they are porous solutions to the same need. The state sends tea west to trade for mountain horses and alliances. It also sends tea north because soldiers sleep badly and march long. A pack train's arrival shifts a garrison's mood like weather. For a week bowls are darker, heads clearer, wounds washed with cleaner water, tempers a degree cooler. The change is small, but small changes are how fatigue loses. Taste maps people. Mongol visitors drink tea with milk and salt and call it proper. Tibetan caravans may bring butter tea, churned to a thick, sustaining broth that feels like food and roofs the stomach against wind. The Han garrison drinks mostly salt tea, thin and steady, because milk is a luxury and butter a rumor. On a very lucky day, a peddler sells candied fruit and a little rock sugar. A shard melts in a mug like a private festival. Men grin into their bowls, embarrassed by sweetness they would never order for themselves. Brick tea solves storage with boredom. It stacks square, breathes little, and lives under bedboard without complaint. If a brick is rare, it sits on the shelf like a minor idol. If plentiful, it becomes part of the wood's smell. You learn to ration in lines cut gently. The officer's knife removes a day's worth along a groove worn by 100 identical decisions. To cut too thick is theft from your tomorrow self. To cut too thin invites a headache by dusk. There is science beneath the superstition. Caffeine is a modest stimulant. Tannins humidify the mouth, warming the body under padded coat, while opening a watchful eye may prevent errors that turn to reports. Boiling water daily reduces the tower's quiet fevers. Tea's bitterness, predictable and acceptable, standardizes the morning the way a drum standardizes the night watch. A body trained to expect a bowl at certain hours moves through chores with fewer negotiations. Records catch the edges. An inventory slip lists 200 bricks Sichuan make marks intact. A reprimand notes that a junior officer issued tea too freely and will repay in silver over 3 months. A medical note, probably written by someone who would not call himself a doctor, recommends strong tea and rest for men with dull headaches after long rides. In a barracks letter that never reached home, a soldier writes that the tea here tastes like iron, but keeps the eyes open in wind. Paper keeps the outlines, heat keeps the rest. One winter march fixes the lesson in your bones. Snow dampens tinder, delay tightens faces, and the trail looks like a row of decisions made by feet. When fire finally takes, the kettle roars and bowls pass one by one into hands that no longer feel clever. The tea is black and salted and almost ugly with strength. You drink and your breath evens. The world shrinks back to a distance you can walk. If courage has a flavor here, it is bitter and warm. Standing by the gate at dusk, looking north into a sky the color of hammered lead, you run a fingertip over the stamped characters on a brick. The pattern is shallow, but it has outlived faces and offices. Tomorrow more curls will fall to the kettle, and another day will open into its chores. The brick is not storybook romance, it is a schedule with edges. If the frontier's line is kept by men who wake on time and see a little farther into the cold, how much of that credit belongs to a dark rectangle of leaves that crumbles like bark and turns to warmth in a dented pot? By mid-morning, the quartermaster's room smells of hemp twine and old rain. You stand by the table while he breaks a brick with the heel of his palm against the knife's spine, an efficient, practiced violence, and weighs the fragments on a small beam. The scale is honest because the garrison's day depends on it. A little too much, and afternoon turns wasteful. A little too little, and the watch goes woolly behind the eyes. Tea-horse policy lives far beyond this room. It was born in earlier centuries when courts learned that cavalry could not be written into existence, only traded for at the edges. Officers with careful names, Cha Ma Si, Tea and Horse, sprang up in Sichuan and Shanxi to barter brick tea for mountain stallions, hay and goodwill. The system bloomed under the Song, changed its paperwork under the Yuan, hardened and relaxed by turns under the Ming. What never changed was the geometry. Tea pressed tight in the wet south, horses and felt from high places, and this dry northern line that drinks the bargain one boil at a time. You trace the brick backward in your mind. In the hills near Yan, pickers work under glaze of mist and spider silk. Leaves are withered, heated, rolled, and piled to darken. Some are pounded into a pulp, steamed again, and pressed in wooden molds under stones or screw presses. Tax marks are tapped in while the cake is damp. When it dries, the mark becomes law you can touch. Bricks travel wrapped in bamboo sheath, stacked into bales that men sling with poles or pack on mules. A good brick rings when you flick it, a dead brick thuds. That sound carries far, right through ledgers into bowls. Water is the other half of the recipe, and it is never just water. In Datung the well runs mineral, with a faint iron edge you taste even after the boil. Men argue quietly about kettles. Iron keeps heat, clay softens bitterness, copper is too fine for a barracks and will vanish between inventories. The garrison owns iron. You rinse the kettle first, not for cleanliness alone, but to warm its body so the boil comes honest and not grudging. A fist of shaved tea goes in at the roll, the pot breathes, a pinch of salt follows. The quartermaster calls this the North style, practical and bracing. If a herdsman has traded milk this week, the cook will ladle a white ribbon into a few bowls for men coming off night watch. Otherwise, you drink it black, brown in the cup, and herb-bitten heat that straightens thinking. Ritual grows where repetition lives. The sentry gets the first ladle, rank is one logic, exposure another. The captain's bowl is filled second and forgotten on the windowsill until he remembers it between slips. Lukewarm tea still wakes, just slower. New men are taught not to gulp. The bitterness stings less if you let it walk across the tongue. A sliver of hard sugar, if available, is passed like a vote. The man who looks most gray gets it, no one argues, and the sweetness folds into his chest like a confession. Tea is also a way to count. The quartermaster cuts the brick along a groove worn into its face, 1 day's ration per groove, 7 grooves to a week. When a patrol is ordered out, he adds a notch and a half for the road and ties the slices in oil paper. The patrol leader signs a wooden tally and pockets the bundle like a promise. Coins would jangle and be lost. Tea rides quiet and turns to attention exactly when asked. Value you can boil is value that cannot argue. Trade mornings at the gate teach you more economics than edicts. A herder from the steppe brings felt rolls and a shy young horse with good shoulders. He drinks his tea with salt and a little flour stirred in, and calls butter tea properly civilized. A Tibetan caravaner ladles buttered, churned tea from a skin bag, thick, nourishing, closer to soup than drink, and soldiers blink at the richness. Someone slips a shard of rock sugar into his own cup and feels briefly like a courtier. Cultures meet where kettles meet. Etiquette is negotiated in ladlefuls. The garrison doctor, he will not wear the name, but the room finds him when teeth ache, uses the kettle as much as he uses herbs. Boiled water washes wounds clean. A strong brew serves as astringent. A cooler pot becomes a safe drink for men with sour stomachs. He writes nothing that will be kept, only prescriptions spoken like chores. More heat, less grease, rest, tea. In a place where water can betray, the daily boil is the preventive that never asks for credit. Discipline shelters under the same lid. Orders set times, tea makes those times livable. Morning drill after the first pot, paperwork while the second simmers, inspection before noon when the third is thin but hot. Men who have a cup to look toward argue less with time. The captain knows this even if he never says the word morale. He defends the brick allotment harder than he defends the sugar jar because he has learned which scarcity turns talk sour. Not all tea is honorable. A corrupt junior clerk can shave rations invisibly, cutting slices too thin and selling the surplus at the market outside the gate. The crime is noticed not in ledgers, but in eyelids and tempers. A week of thin brew makes the watch sloppy and the jokes cruel. When the captain measures the brick against the groove and finds daylight where there should be none, punishment is swift and quiet, repayment in silver over months, and the scale moved to the captain's own table for a season. You understand, then, that stimulants are not luxuries here. They are part of the command structure. Campaign seasons distill the lesson. On a long ride west in early spring, ice fringes streams and the wind strips thought. Fires fight for a spark. When flame catches, the kettle roars and the first cups go down fast and nearly without taste. The second cup is slower, and with it men find their sentences. Horses shake their manes, steam lifting like banners. The column moves again with the slightly unreal sense that effort has become possible. Tea is not courage, it is the slope under courage's feet. Ledger entries preserve only the outlines. Received, bricks 200, issued, bricks 18, remainder 182, loss 1 damp. A second slip notes, 1 officer fined for extravagance in tea issue to repay 3 mace monthly. Another lists bricks from yarn, stamp clear, outer leaves sound. The paper never says that the late watch lad on the east wall stopped blinking after his second bowl, or that the patrol came in earlier than expected because the fire was started quickly at the ford. At dusk you pour the day's last brew, thinner, easier, something like a warm thought, and the barracks relaxes without quite admitting it. Men polish buckles because hands need something quiet. A herdsman's song drifts through the gate, syllables drawn long by distance. The brick on the quartermaster's shelf has shrunk by 1 stern, tidy slice. Tomorrow the knife will find the same groove. If a garrison's line can be tightened by a bitter warmth that arrives on time, what happens when the brick does not? When snow buries the pass, or a clerk in a city far away miscounts? And what other small, daily bindings keep the edge from fraying when the stimulant fails? The break in the system comes quietly, the way fatigue does. Snow stacks in the passes to the southwest. A messenger arrives 3 days late, mule caked white to the knees, cheeks split by wind. His slip is brief. The pack train turned back at a drift that swallowed the road markers. Another attempt in a week. In the quartermaster's room, the knife hesitates over the groove, then descends anyway. Today's slice is honest. Tomorrow's will be thinner. Rationing becomes a style of speech. The captain says, first pot as usual, and no one remarks that the ladle is lifted faster, that bowls are filled a thumb's width lower. You notice the adjustment in other ways. A sentry squints longer into the morning grey. A scribe rubs his temple before the brush starts. The cook roasts a handful of barley in a pan and tips it into the kettle, darkening the water and pretending toward bitterness. He salts the brew a touch more. Salt convinces the tongue to accept less as enough. Out on patrol, you improvise. A slice of brick, now the thickness of a fingernail, goes into the iron kettle with a fist of roasted millet. The liquid pours tawny rather than brown, but the warmth works on the hands and the habit works on the mind. At the ford, men move a beat slower and say less. The horses flick their ears without the usual snap. No one calls it a problem. They just keep lighting fires sooner and sitting a moment longer with bowls under their noses, breathing the steam as if it carried orders. The captain watches for slippage the way a doctor watches for fever. He tightens the schedule rather than the tone, Drills begin on the drumbeat, inspections end on the clapper. He gives the late-watch pair the first ladles from the morning pot, pours his own last, and leaves it to cool on the sill until it is almost medicinal. The quartermaster shifts to clay kettles borrowed from a civilian stall. Clay softens bitterness when leaves are thin, and posts the scale on his table so the knife cannot misbehave in a pocket. When the second delay notice arrives, he opens the reserve trunk. 2 bricks remain, wrapped in bamboo that smells of older rain. One carries a faint bloom of damp on its corner. He trims it away with a care that feels like apology. The other rings true when he flicks it, and you can see men stand a fraction straighter at the sound. It is the most optimistic note you hear all week. He logs the issue on a slip that will outlive you both. The shortfall teaches a different history, how people keep going when the stimulant is thought rather than substance. The cook leans into ritual. He warms bowls before pouring. He taps the rim twice to call men one by one. He sets the kettle where its sound becomes a metronome. Habit steps into caffeine's place and holds the line by memory. The doctor prescribes water more hot than strong, and the advice nobody wants, but everyone knows to be sound. Breathe, sit, eat something unremarkable, sleep when the drum allows. A caravan finally punches through with chains on wheels and curse-shaped breath. The first crate onto the quartermaster's table is not tea but salt. The second is needles. The third is tea at last. Sichuan makes stamp shallow but clear. The room changes before any kettle is lit. A brick pops under the heel, and the knife moves like a man released from a promise he kept too long. The first pot goes to the walls, the second to the patrol just in, the third to menders and runners. No one speaks of headaches. A few men smile without their faces quite admitting it. You pour a bowl and think about the chain that made this warmth. Pickers in mist, pressers in sheds that smell like steam and wood, inspectors with stamps, porters with yokes, muleteers with songs, clerks with scales, captains with ledgers, cooks with burned thumbs. Tea is a stimulant, but it is also a proof that far places can lean on each other without breaking. An empire is a schedule in motion. Other centuries will handle the geometry differently. Under the Qing, tribute grades change names and routes shift. Brick tea remains a frontier staple where butter and wind are also staples. Long after the garrisons thin, caravans climb toward the plateau with juanchas stacked like dark bricks of weather, turning into butter tea at yak's pace. In the 20th century, archaeologists will find bricks in storerooms where dust settled faster than hands moved, the stamps still legible, the leaves still stubborn. They will brew fragments as experiments and write about tannins and smell, and for a moment, the lab will share a room with this barracks. You think of other stimulants that have taken turns at the same job. Coffee in red-coated camps by wet hedgerows, yerba mate among soldiers in the southern cone, cocoa in a friar's cell while ledgers are copied by lamplight. Civilizations rhyme in mugs. The work is not glamorous. Sterilized water, warmed fingers, slightly brightened nerves, a clock placed back on its hook. Small awakenings let bigger tasks proceed without speeches. Even failures rely on kettles. When a clerk somewhere shaves the ration or a mule collapses in a drift, the damage shows up not in manifestos but in eyelids and patience. Men mumble, then miss, then mend. The captain learns to read that weather and defend against it with the only weapons allowed to an honest post. Fair slices, predictable hours, the kind of steadiness that does not require agreement to function. The garrison survives not because it is fierce, but because it is rhythmic. At the edge of spring, you ride a long patrol under sky the color of tin. The wind is generous and the roads are indifferent. At a stream, the fire takes on the third try. Some days are like that, and the kettle shakes off the cold with an almost comic relief. The brew is strong and salted. It is not delicious. It is a tool. You drink and the world recedes to a scale you can walk. The horses lower their heads at the same time, which feels like a blessing in a language nobody speaks. Dusk presses the day flat. In the quartermaster's room, the brick is smaller by one careful slice, and the groove is honest again. You put the kettle away with a cloth to keep soot off the shelves. The doctor sets out 2 cups for late callers. The captain closes the ledger and leaves it on the table instead of locking it, confidence declared in furniture. A boy assigned to firewood leans his ear near the cooling iron and listens for pops, as if embers had advice. You run a finger across the stamp on the new brick and wonder what portion of the garrison's competence lives in that shallow impression, and what portion lives in the hands that cut it straight. If a small rectangle of bitterness can keep an empire's edge from blurring, what other mild, predictable habits hold up more of our days than we care to admit? And what happens when we forget to light the kettle? Story 4. Pickles for the dry months, preserving calm at Juyong Pass. You wake to vinegar in the air and frost on the lip of a clay jar. Juyong Pass is a stone throw north of the capital. Winter speaks through it in long, dry sentences. The wall shoulders the ridge. Below it, a garrison kitchen hums without hurry. The cook has a wooden mallet and a patience shaped by seasons. On the tamped earth floor, crocks stand in ranks along the coolest wall, their mouths sealed with paper, cloth, and a smear of clay. A brush has named them in black: cabbage, radish, scallion, mustard stalks, last summer's cucumbers caught in brine like green bookmarks. Juyong is busy even when nothing is happening. Mules clatter through the gate. Porters shoulder crates. The cloud platform, white stone, carved in the yuan with mantras and edicts, watches it all without comment. In the kitchen, the language is simpler: boil, salt, seal, wait. Fresh greens are a memory that will not come back until the first thaw coaxes shoots out of ditch edges. Until then, sour is the color of hope. Lift a lid. The paper crackles, the clay seal cracks, and a smell rises that could wake a sleeping spoon. Juyong Kai sour cabbage was shredded in early autumn when heads were fat and crisp. Salt pulled water from the leaves into a brine. Lactic bacteria, unlabeled and hardworking, ate the easy sugars and left acid. The crock has been quiet for months, except for bubbles counted by nobody in the first weeks. Now the cabbage is a subdued yellow, pliant but not limp, sour without cruelty. The cook fishes a fistful with chopsticks and squeezes it lightly to test the day. A good jar has the virtue of a sentry: consistent, alert, uncomplaining. Pickles make the garrison less brittle. Men who eat something alive, even if it died into brine months ago, sit up straighter, mouths water. The blandness of millet congee opens to a bright edge. In the thick of winter, when the air drinks water from your skin, sourness reminds the body how to make saliva, how to swallow without effort, how to enjoy a bowl whose ingredients have no surprises. No one says health, they say appetite, and the day gets easier. Salt is policy as much as flavor. Cones arrive under seals from the monopoly. The quartermaster shaves them into coarse crystals with a short iron knife. The recipe is not written, but the cook knows it in hands. A bowl of clean water, salt till a raw egg floats just enough, then the cut vegetables pressed under brine with a circle of wood and 2 river stones kept only for this. A layer of rice chaff or a mat of reed keeps vegetable pieces from bobbing toward air. Paper, cloth, clay, label. Wait, it is a religion of patience that doesn't ask for belief. Different jars tell different roads. A crock of mustard greens carries the brown hum of old fields. Scallion bulbs packed whole remember a sweeter month and give it back in slices. Radish strips were salted hard and dried on racks, then slipped into a lighter brine later, more chew than crunch, more memory than boast. In a corner sit 2 small pots of fermented soybean paste, jiang, thick and sun-browned, stirred through pickled juice to make a sauce that tastes like thrift turned wise. Vinegar connects far places. Traders from Shanxi bring heavy jugs, their mouths waxed, their bodies wrapped in straw. Mature vinegar there is aged in clay and air. At the pass it carries a dark, plummy depth that makes a pot seem older, kinder. A ladle of it into cabbage pickle brine steadies the flavor and scolds any stray molds that want to write their names on the surface. The cook saves every drop. A spoonful will wash a cutting board, wake a feverish appetite, or silence the mustiness that sneaks into winter kitchens. You help with the morning's allotment. Breakfast porridge is thin but hot. Each bowl receives a nest of chopped Juyong Kai and 3 drops of vinegar. The room exhales the way men do after a joke that doesn't need words. Someone adds a pinch of douche, fermented black soybeans, smearing the edge of the spoon with a paste that smells like meat from a distance. A jar of pickled garlic opens with a sigh. Cloves come out pale and soft, sweet at the center. No one speaks of vitamins or wards. They speak of the stomach's calm and the day's length. Pickles do logistics you can taste. When a rumble of carts arrives, thin snow on the canal, a clerk in the city late to his desk, the jars keep discipline from turning to temper. A thin stew turns into a meal if it carries a promise of sour. On March mornings, a small crock rides in the mule pannier along with dried tofu, millet and salt. At noon, a handful of mustard stalks eaten with cold cakes puts men back on their feet with less complaint than any speech. The captain pretends not to notice this moral arithmetic, while noticing it exactly. There are dangers and repairs. A jar that smells wrong gets triaged. Skim the bloom, add a pinch more salt, a splash of vinegar, weigh the lid better, move the crock to the colder corner under the north wall. Jars are not equal, each has a character like a soldier. Some ferment fast and wild, good for quick relishes. Some go slow and quiet, better for deep winter. You learn to read them by sound when you thump the shoulder with a knuckle. Full jars give a round answer, nearly empty ones a tired one. Empty jars are a kind of alarm bell. Men remember autumn through their mouths. Harvest weeks tasted of radish barked by cold, of cucumbers tamped under brine with peppercorns and a long slice of ginger, of eggplant rubbed with salt and set to sink. Those jars saved the pass's temper when wind began and the road to the city turned to iron. In late spring, when the first wild shoots appear, the last of the old pickles are chopped into fried noodle sauce as if to spend a year's thrift on a single generous taste. Outside the kitchen, the pass keeps its other ledgers. The cloud platform's white terrace remembers edicts in 6 scripts, the wall remembers sieges without romance. But the garrison's truest archive is here on the floor in fired clay. Jars mark failures and prudence more faithfully than any inscription. The year the radishes ran small, the winter the cabbage went soft. The seasoned vinegar arrived late and brine had to stand alone. If the jars stay honest, the men do too. You set a lid back, press clay around its edge, and breathe a little of last autumn into your lungs. A simple question walks the room on the smell of vinegar and cabbage. When snow holds the road and fresh green is a rumor, what keeps a hard post civil more reliably than a steady jar and the decision, made months ago, to salt memory against hunger. By midwinter the kitchen's breath is slow and regular, and you can read the week by the crocks. Cabbage jars have sunk by 2 hand widths. Radish jars have entered their best days, crunch turning to friendly chew. The cook keeps a quiet ledger no officer asks to see, dates of opening, brine clarity, a small cross beside a jar that bloomed white and needed skimming. It is not shame, it is housekeeping. The science remains unnamed but familiar. Salt pulls water from cells, lactic bacteria wake on leaf skins, brine grows unfriendly to the wrong guests. A splash of rice wash, the cloudy first rinse, sometimes coaxes a slow jar forward, starch feeding the helpful and shortening the twitchy days when pickles think about turning. When north wind cools the room, fermentation lowers its voice, but not its purpose. The cook thumps a stubborn crock and listens for the round, healthy answer. Vinegar bridges gaps you cannot schedule. Shanxi traders arrive on still days, jugs cushioned in straw. Inside sleeps a dark liquid aged in clay, smelling faintly of smoke and sour plum. A ladle seals small faults, a timid brine, a jar opened too often, a day when salt dissolved unevenly. The quartermaster does not call vinegar medicine. The kitchen does, and with better results. At Juyong Pass, routine kept history from becoming news. The cloud platform stone remembers Sanskrit and 4 scripts of Chinese. The road remembers envoys and armies. The kitchen remembers the year a flood muddied the canal and cabbage prices in the capital climbed like stairs. That winter hands leaned harder on mustard stalks and dried eggplant. Jars labeled cucumber were saved for rest days and men coming off long shifts at the gate. Prudence is tasted before sour. Morning work is choreographed without a conductor. One man draws well water from the case shaft where ropes have grooved the lip. Another splits a salt cone and judges pinches by palm weight. A third rinses the board with hot water and vinegar, then rubs it with a heel of ginger to bully away last night's garlic. The knife's rhythm is the drum, cabbage into ribbons, radish into coins or matchsticks, scallions into rounds that release a green, brave smell. Old crocks have biographies. One bears a hairline from a careless cart. It lives in a woven sling and is moved by 2 pairs of hands. Another seals especially well because a mason smoothed its lip with a brick. It never blooms and is favored for cucumbers. A small pear inherited from a retired sergeant's wife makes scallion pickles so crisp men swear they hear summer in their teeth. None of this is written down, all of it is knowledge. Pickles are currency too, though nobody coins them. A small bowl traded to a porter buys gentler handling for a crate that matters. A jar sent to the outer watch buys quiet on a changeable night. When a monk stops to copy scripture at the cloud platform, the kitchen sends pale, sweet garlic cloves and receives a blessing that smells of lampblack and cedar. Jars become favors without becoming debts. Illness edits habits. Winter gums sulk when diet narrows. Sourness calls saliva back and keeps chewing honest. A soldier with a rough tongue gets softer porridge, a larger tangle of cabbage, and a spoon of brine at the last second. The cook says it settles the stomach. The doctor nods because kitchens hold knowledge ledgers never learn. When someone coughs, the doorway steams with vinegar at night, not by edict, by memory. Waste is the enemy, boredom its ally. The kitchen keeps a second ledger in the head that tracks peelings and ends. Radish greens are salted for a side jar. The scrappiest strips dry near rafters to wake a lean soup. The last inch of a vinegar jug rinses bowls before it becomes floor cleaner. Even flabby cucumbers slouched through summer turn gentle once they surrender to brine and garlic. A year planned in quiet can be trusted. Beyond the door, supply keeps a different pace. The salt monopoly's seals crack open on the quartermaster's table. He shaves cones and makes lists that please auditors more than mouths. Carts squeal, mules complain, and men read the road with ears. But in a snow week, muscles wait. The jars do not. They are stored labor from a softer season, and you understand why armies that pickle are armies that can wait without tearing. Not every taste is sober. On a festival evening, the cook brightens mustard greens with toasted sesame and a drip of honey traded from a beekeeper who followed spring into the hills. Men chew quietly because joy in a barracks must be kept from spooking. A jar of quick-pickled chilies appears and makes noses run. Laughter does work cinnamon cannot. Then lids go back on, clay is resealed, and the room returns to the color of dill and brine. Weather argues with jars. A warm snap coaxes a yeasty bloom, a cold sink thickens brine and slows everything to sulking. The cook moves crocks like a general pulling units left and right, always one day ahead. He has lost jars and will again. Loss does not make him theatrical, it makes him meticulous. A tiny cross on the lid, a pinch more salt, a tip of vinegar, cloth tucked tighter, cure unhastened. Salt rations shape temper. Some captains cut too fine and save praise for ledgers. Their men chew, swallow, and grow careful with words. Better posts keep brine honest and speech easy. Discipline can taste like fairness. A ladle poured evenly calms rumor faster than a proclamation pinned to a gate. Pickles keep the road civil. Muleteers, carters, and stonemasons can be fed quickly without gutting stores. A hot bowl, a fan of cabbage, a thimble of vinegar. The courtyard lifts a degree. When two caravans quarrel over who entered the arch first, the captain gestures toward the kitchen. The argument dissolves in steam before it becomes a report. In one corner, the cook keeps a mother brine older than anyone can date. New batches start from it, not as magic, but continuity, a taste carried forward the way a song is. He says it remembers good habits. You believe him when you sip and feel both winter and autumn on the tongue. Spring comes as rumor first. Shepherds purse by the stones, a warmer well rope, a fly that dares the doorway. The last jars taste triumphant and a little tired. They have held a season together without speeches. You stand in the threshold with a bowl, watch the pass exhale, and think a strange thought, that civility is a flavor and that it can be stored. Outside, the wall keeps its line. Inside, jars keep tempers even and minutes easy to count at dusk. If peace at a choke point depends on tastes saved in clay, how many other brittle places are steadied by quiet work we did months ago? And will we remember to keep salting the future when the road looks easy? Thaw comes with a soft cracking sound you feel more than hear. The south face of the road sheds its ice in pains, the north face keeps its grit. Meltwater fingers into ruts, then chooses a single groove and becomes a stream that believes it is a law. Juyong Pass takes the water and argues back with stone and drains. For a week the arch is a throat clearing. Carts wait, hooves stamp, tempers shrink to fit the weather. Inside the kitchen, the same steam rises as yesterday. You set lids aside and tap the rims of crocks with a knuckle. Cabbage still bright, radish now at its gentlest, scallions crisp enough to remind the mouth that spring is a rumor with a schedule. The cook skims a ghost white bloom from one jar, harmless, just air finding a way in, and flicks it into a pail with a shrug. He salts his fingers before touching the next lid. Habits write the law when the law is busy. The road clots. A court courier, 2 grain wagons, a brickmaker's cart, and a monk with a mule find themselves trapped in a polite quarrel beneath the arch. Everyone is correct. Nobody can move. The captain sends a corporal with a board and chalk to draw a Q on stone. Carts by Axel, then Beast, then urgency written down instead of shouted. He does one other thing that matters more than the chalk. He sends you with a covered tray. Pickles broker what paper cannot. Bowls of thin millet are set on the board, then a fan of suan kai over each, and a thimble of shanxi vinegar dropped as punctuation. The monk thanks the cabbage the way he thanked the platform's inscriptions, hands together, eyes soft. The brickmaker, cheeks salt bright from his own kiln, eats in 4 steady bites and promises clay lids at discount next month. The courier takes a second fan of radish without asking and becomes marginally more human. A line that would have been a report becomes a meal that became a plan. Illness comes in the thaw the way cracks do, small first. 2 men show swollen gums and a tendency to bleed at the teeth when they gnaw the noon cakes. No one says a Latin word or writes a theory. The cook doubles the pickle ration for their bowls and adds a spoon of brine just before serving. The doctor steams vinegar in their bunkhouse at dusk and sends them to scrub with salt. After a week of sourness and steam, conversation returns to the color of their tongues instead of the color of their blood. You notice the captain make a note to thank a jar rather than a man. The jars themselves become characters you greet. One cabbage crock develops a dignified funk the cook calls Old Field. Another remains bright as a bell. A scallion pot soldiers on past its proper season because the lip seals so beautifully that time forgets to argue. 2 small garlic jars, gifts from a sergeant's wife who left with a caravan, are rationed like compliments. You learn which lid creaks, which lid sighs, which lid refuses drama. Crooks and heroes belong to stories. Here you keep company with lids. A landslip finally makes news of your routine. Meltwater undercut a cutbank above the eastern approach and laid a panel of hillside across the road with the dull grace of a door falling off its hinges. No catastrophe, soil and stone, some scrub, a suggestion of roots. The captain divides the day like a loaf. 1 work gang digs, 1 hauls, 1 shores up the drain, 1 keeps the gate polite. Your place is the bowl line. Pickles let you feed 100 hands at the noon bell without lighting a second fire. Recipes become tactics. Radish coins tossed with hot oil and douchey slide into congee and turn it toward meat. Cabbage chopped small and splashed with vinegar asks nothing of teeth that have been clenching. A quick relish, scallions, ginger, heated brine sits on a plank, and the men who take a little work more neatly afterward. The captain does not call it morale. He calls it keeping the bell's schedule honest. Same idea, fewer syllables. Supply catches up. Grain creaks into the courtyard. Salt cones arrive under their jute veils. A cooper walks his hand along the rims of 2 new jars and nods as if greeting old acquaintances. You log a new batch. Cabbage shredded, salt measured against water that floats an egg. A circle of wood pushed down until brine just lifts over it. A small stone on top becomes the memory of your palm. You seal the mouth with paper and clay, write the month, and feel the peculiar calm that comes when you make patience concrete. Spring plants wink from the ditch edges, shepherd's purse, chickweed, and the last of the old jars taste almost ceremonial. The cook empties one with the gravity of someone closing a book at its last page. The brine is saved to start another, because flavor has a lineage and deserves heirs. He says the mother brine remembers good manners. You believe it when you taste the new cabbage a week later and find it already pointed in the right direction. A small inspection arrives from the capital, men with neat lists and tight hairlines who want to see the drain ledgers, the salt records, the readiness of the gate. The captain shows them the chalk board and the shovel rack, the cloud platform and the postern hinges. He also walks them into the kitchen and raps a crock with a knuckle. One inspector smiles despite himself when vinegar meets his nose. For a moment, the idea of governance has a flavor. There is loss too. A jar cracks on a hot day because someone set it too near the stove. The brine bleeds into clay, and the room goes quiet in a way that is not solemn, just precise. The cook saves what he can, salts what remains, washes the floor with vinegar and hot water, and moves the others an arm's length farther. A cross is marked on the lip as a cautionary proverb. The next morning nobody remembers to be angry, because there is cabbage to slice and a drain still deciding whether it wants to be a ditch or a river. By mid-spring, fresh greens return to bowls, and pickles become accent rather than anchor. The jars retreat to their cool wall, half full, patient, like elders at a festival who stand back and let new faces try speaking first. You clean their shoulders with a rag dipped in vinegar and read their labels like birthdays. The road dries. The arch forgets its stutter. The pass inhales through both nostrils again. You walk out at dusk and lay a hand on the cloud platform stone, its scripts quiet and exact. The jars behind you are the station's other inscription, lunch counted into lids, winters kept from becoming reports, tempers stored until needed. Armies are said to be provisions and roads and orders. At a choke point, the list needs one more line, acids and salts, made months ago, poured on time. If civility at the narrowest part of a country can be held in clay and brine, what other futures could we keep from turning sour if we learn to salt them early and taste them often? Story 5, Buckwheat, Oats and Wind, the Northland bread of wall menders. You wake to a tent wall moving like a slow breath and a smell of dry husks warming on iron. The camp sits in a wind pocket beneath a broken crenel, somewhere along a scrubby ridge between Hebei and the grasslands. It is repair season, the kind that comes every year without needing a name. Parapets have slumped, drains have silted, a stair has opened like a book left in rain. You are here with masons, carters and farmers on corvée, the ordinary army of maintenance. A brazier ticks. Someone coughs, someone else is grinding flour. The quern is low and round, 2 stones with a wooden handle that walk a circle by patience. Into the upper eye go handfuls of grain the color of dust, buckwheat and naked oats. Buckwheat kairom likes poor soils and short seasons. It flowers quick, feeds bees and gives back a seed shaped like a black pyramid. Oats yanmai and the hulled kind called yaomai up here thrive where nights are cold and the wind seems to scrape the fields. Both grains shrug at thin dirt and late frost. Wheat would prefer a kinder valley. Rice is a rumor from the south. The quern does not care. It makes a gray, speckled meal that smells faintly of hay and smoke. Without gluten you do not need, you persuade. A pail of water comes off a boil, and the cook pours in a thin stream while another stirs with a stick. This is scalding, tangmian turning stubborn starch toward obedience. A pinch of salt, sometimes a breath of ash water if someone sifted yesterday's hearth and saved the clear lie. When the dough holds together without sulking, it is pressed into 2 destinies. Half becomes bing, flat cakes for the griddle. Half becomes oat rolls for the steamer, the Shanxi habit. Yaomi and Wawatu, small cones pinched with 3 fingers and nested like little chimneys in a basket. The kitchen is a steamer perched over an iron wok, its rim sealed with a twist of straw rope. Underneath, fuel is whatever the hill will allow, willow brush, broom grass, brickmaker's scraps, dry dung trodden to cakes. The camp cannot waste wood on romance. Heat is a tool. The first bing hits the aozi, a round iron griddle black as a moonless pond. It blisters in quiet freckles and lifts at the edges when it is ready to flip. The wawatu steam until they smell sweet, which is not sugar, but starch remembering rain. Breakfast is a board balanced on 2 stones, a stack of bing wrapped in cloth to keep their temper, a mound of pickled cabbage flicked with chili, a jar of soybean paste whose surface shines with sesame oil, a small dish of salt because men sprinkle salt when days are long. You take a bing, tear it, fold in sour cabbage and a finger of paste, and eat in 4 measured bites. The cake is tender from the scald, grainy at the edge, satisfying in the way that does not ask your opinion. A wawatu follows, denser, a little earthy, and you understand why the steamer does not rest all day. Work is layers, clear the drain, dress the face, tamp fill behind a parapet with chaff and earth, lift brick, strike joint, move the scaffold. Food is layers too. Mid-morning, someone toasts buckwheat in a dry pan until it clicks. A handful steeped in the kettle makes a brown drink that is neither tea nor soup, only warmth with a story. At noon, the bing return with company, a shallow stew of dried tofu and scallions, the broth thickened by a spoon of oatmeal stirred in at the last minute. In the afternoon, cold cakes travel in pockets, and a small cone of oat bread sits on a wall top like a spare tool until fingers find it. Buckwheat's usefulness multiplies in quiet ways. Its straw becomes short thatch for a tool lean-to. Its husks, light, tough, fill a pillow slip someone stitched from a worn shirt. When you lie down at noon, the cushion rustles like field mice and keeps your neck dry. Chaff mixes into rammed earth as temper where an old crenel needs height. It lightens, binds, asks little. Oat straw twists into soft rope that will not cut palms when crates are lifted. None of this gets written. It gets used. The camp's bread schedule is also a mood schedule. Thick bing in the morning means stores are honest. Thin ones mean carts are late, or the quartermaster tightens his jaw. When a wagon finally creaks in from a village with sacks traded for brickmakers' credit, everyone eats a second roll without namming celebration. When rain bullies the ridge and fires sulk, the cook stretches oat dough with hot water and makes noodles, yaomian, rolled under damp palms into thin strings that look like straw and steam in layers. They are eaten with garlic and vinegar, and the sense, however faint, that wind can be answered. Recipes are stubborn because weather is. Buckwheat cakes hold together only if scalded right. Oat cones collapse if rushed. A young helper learns to wet his fingers before pinching wauatu to keep from tearing edges. He learns to oil the griddle when buckwheat sulks. He learns that flour sifted once makes a better steamer day than flour sifted not at all. He fails without scandal. The camp eats his mistakes because there is lime to slake and stone to carry, and appetite is policy. Supplies tangle with distance the way ropes tangle around axles. Oat and buckwheat come mostly from upland plots that belong to the menders themselves. They plant in late spring and late summer, a double insurance for short seasons. If the first crop sulks, the second may still forgive. Tax registers take grain by volume, the wall takes grain by breath. On the ledger, these flowers are called coarse. In your mouth, they are what keeps your hands from trembling when the scaffold shifts and the wind noses into your sleeves. At dusk, the steamer still works. The last tier is for tomorrow's morning, because a wall lives on prepared food the way a watch lives on a prepared fire. The cook wipes the griddle with straw, scrapes flour into a crock, and leans a board over the remaining rolls to keep mice from making history. Men stretch along the kang bed stove with bowls of hot water turned brown by toasted grain. Someone says that wheat is a city habit and rice a dream. Up here, wind eats bread, and bread answers. You lie back on the buckwheat hull pillow, listening to husks rearrange like dry rain, and watch dusk fill the gap where a krenel will be tomorrow. Your tongue holds the last of the day's sour and the tame bitterness of roasted seed. A practical thought drifts in as the brazier dims. When the harvest comes late or the road comes empty, how thin can you press a cake and still keep a day steady? And who decides where flavor ends and strength begins? By the second day you can tell time by dough. Before sun touches the broken krenel, the quern is already whispering, and a clay jar comes out from under the bedboard like a secret. Inside is old dough, laomian, saved from yesterday, a small colony of sour that remembers how to rise where gluten refuses to help. The cook tips a thumb-sized lump into warm water and stirs until it loosens, then adds the gray mixed meal. Buckwheat and oat drink differently. He feeds one patience and the other heat. A splash of ash water, Juyong, goes in from a bottle where yesterday's stove leavings settled. The alkali softens the bitter, pushes the dough towards springiness, and keeps the steamer's stacks from turning sulky. No one says chemistry, they say it behaves. Steaming rules where wheat rules baking. Up here, steam is gentle and democratic. It forgives. A bamboo basket would be a luxury, so the camp uses tight-woven willow trays lined with old cloth rubbed with oil to discourage sticking. The lid is cypress staves bound with wire, heavy enough to keep wind from stealing the heat. When the water boils, you hear the lid hum. A good steamer sings in one note. A warped lid sings two and wastes fuel. Fuel is negotiated every hour. Dried dung bricks burn slow, broom grass catches fast, a strip of split willow is worth two of brush. Ash isn't waste, it is tomorrow's Juyong. After breakfast, the brazier's tray is scraped into a wide bowl and doused. Floating ash is skimmed to a bottle, the heavy falls away. The cook lets the bottle sit until the water turns silky between his fingers. Not soap, he says, discipline. He means that a fingertip of Juyong can rescue a dough that would crumble in the hand, and that rescue is cheaper than starting again. Work parties flow in loops you could walk with your eyes closed. Ram a course of fill, dress a face with river pebbles and lime, rebuild the drain lip, carry brick up a ladder that names your thighs. Bread breaks become punctuation, thick bing at 5, small wauatu at 9, noodle broth at noon if flour allows, a fist-sized cake at mid-afternoon, something hot again at dark. The quartermaster trims slices by sight, then checks himself against a notch on the ladle's handle. Fairness is a shape in wood, not a speech. The camp ledger is dull on purpose. It says oat, buckwheat, salt, vinegar, dried tofu, oil. It says bodies, tools, days. It does not say the way a scalded dough goes from stubborn to docile in 3 heartbeats, the soft sigh when a lid lifts, the smell of hot grain that silences a complaint without the captain lifting an eyebrow. It does not mention the boy with the cracked knuckles who has learned to wet his fingers before pinching wauwatu, nor the old mason who flips a bing with one hand and presses a corner back into the wall with the other. Grain turns up in a dozen disguises. Breakfast cakes, yes, but also porridge for men nursing a cough, meal simmered thin with pickle brine and scallion, noodles on days of rain, oat strings rolled under palmwood sticks, steamed in coils, then tossed with garlic, a spoon of soybean paste, and a ladle of shanxi vinegar that lifts the whole thing toward appetite. Travel cakes for the scaffold team, yesterday's being re-steamed for breath and tucked into sleeves to warm hands before being eaten with 2 bites and a swallow of hot water browned with toasted buckwheat. The same straw that held the querns, sack lines, a repair trench so wet earth won't steal your shoes. Trade creeps to camp on short legs. A herdsman trades a skin of soured milk for 2 stacks of bing and a promise to help shore a fence. The cook stirs a ladle into the noon dough, making the cakes smell faintly of grass and turning their crumb tender. A peddler brings a cone of dark vinegar wrapped in reed mat. The captain buys it without bargaining because vinegar turns oat noodles from penance into lunch and keeps mouths wet in wind that drinks saliva. Someone sells half a fist of raw sesame. It disappears into a jar and reappears brighter on a festival day, toasted and scattered like good news. Maintenance is an argument with time that food helps you win. Rammed earth segments need temper, chaff, husks, straw cut short to knit and dry without cracking. The same grain you eat becomes the wall's memory. Lime must be slaked and then ignored. Bread must be scalded and then hurried. You learn to make patience and haste live in the same hour. You also learn the quiet ambidexterity of camps. A man can spread mortar, then pinch 3 wauwatu with dough he has not washed from his fingers, then go back to the tamping queue before the steamer sighs. Corvée pulls farmers in from nearby hills, and their bags speak dialect. Some bring broomcorn millet to blend into the porridge pot. Some bring broomcorn brooms and leave with an IOU for flour. One old woman arrives with buckwheat hull pillows for sale, the slipcovers made from a wedding shirt faded into usefulness, and the menders buy 2 for the tent so the men who sleep between watches keep their necks correct. Grain holds heads as well as stomachs. You come to trust signs the cook reads without thinking. Dough that tears vertically wants more scald. Dough that smears wants ash water. Dough that looks right and won't rise wants time away from your opinion. He makes small repairs with a wooden spoon, an extra pinch of salt for men who sweat hard, a thicker cake just before the scaffold goes up, vinegar set near the board for anybody whose mouth looks tired. He never says morale, he spreads it. Every camp has a minor scandal. This week it is a rumor that the quartermaster is slicing the wauwatu a finger narrow and swapping flour to a cousin down the slope. The captain weighs cakes in his hand at breakfast, says nothing, then lingers by the steamer mid-afternoon and watches the scoop. No ledger is consulted. The next morning the rolls are broader and the rumor drains like a puddle in sun. Bread is law where paper is slow. Weather edits recipes. A warm gust makes dough loose. He firms it with extra meal. A dry blast makes cakes crack. He soothes them with a damp cloth and steam. When rain camps on the ridge and the floor turns to something that wants your boots, he stops making bing for a day and leans into noodles. Steam to avoid smoke, steam to keep hands busy under canvas, steam because a pot of boiling water turns mud into place rather than complaint. The steamer is a tent's second roof. The day a wagon finally rattles in with sacks from a village that owed brick to the state and paid with grain instead, the camp's breath changes. Flour is no longer the argument in the room. The cook allows himself a foolishness. Buckwheat crepes cooked wafer thin on the griddle, brushed with oil, sprinkled with scallion, rolled into green striped scrolls that men eat while shaking their heads at how much the land can pretend to be generous. They work half an hour later into dusk without anyone mentioning it. By night you know the bread by touch. A wauwatu cools heavy in the palm, a bing cools flat and flexible, a noodle cools into something that asks vinegar. You also know that tomorrow the wall will still need dressing, the drain will still want a hand, and the wind will still talk through joints like a clerk reading a list. You sip hot water stained with roasted buckwheat and find the taste beautifully plain. If a post survives on cakes that ask for care but not ceremony, where is the line between enough and not quite? At what point does a thinner slice stop being thrift and start eating the camp's nerve? And who gets to call that cut? Wind comes up early, a dry hand riffling canvas and names. It makes the ladders speak and the scaffold mutter, and the captain squints as if he could read whether the way he reads a ledger. You hold a cake in one hand and a mallet in the other, and try not to let either one decide the hour. Repair days do not pause for wind, they adjust to it. The cook adds a thumb of ash water to the morning dough so the bings stay supple in the cold, then leans the steaming basket near a windbreak of stacked brick. Steam rises like a small, private season. The wall needs a decision. Last winter's freeze opened a stair run, spring melt carried grit into the drain and made the slope choose badly. Summer's first storm will make the problem honest. The foreman taps his trowel against stone and chooses order. Raise the parapet tooth by 2 courses, recut the drain lip, feed the fill with chaff, face with pebble and lime. Food to men, food to wall, he says, and you all nod because it is not poetry, it is plan. Bread marks the plan's beats. Thick bing at first light for lifting, wauatu after the scaffold is tied, oat noodles at noon when hands must unclinch, griddle cakes again as the last course sets. The cook measures fairness without sermon, the ladle has a notch, the scoop a scar, the stack a memory. You can tell when the quartermaster has slept poorly because the cakes come out thin and even, the way a cautious man speaks. Today they are wide and soft, a promise that the sacks under canvas will last the week. The wind tries tactics. It takes mortar from the trowel's face and throws it back as powder. It worries the scaffold ties. It drinks spit. The menders answer with oat straw rope, twist, spit, pull, loop, ropes that do not cut palms and do not mind weather. Chaff goes into rammed earth, each lift tamped to a thunk that sounds like agreement. Buckwheat husks line a shallow trench so boots do not disappear into ambition. If you pay attention, you can hear food changing jobs. Straw is rope, chaff is temper, husks are bedding, ash is discipline, dough is fuel. At mid-morning, a small accident rights itself. A young man misjudges a rung, bangs a shin, and sits with his breath held between his teeth. The medic pours hot water over a pinch of salt, swirls in a slug of vinegar, and rinses grit away while the cook slides a wauatu into his hand. The bread is practical consolation. It asks nothing from his mouth but obedience. He chews, somebody knots his rope, work resumes. Nothing worth a report, everything worth remembering. A wagon comes groaning up the slope under the authority of 2 reluctant mules. Inside, mixed grain from a village that paid its brick levy in flour rather than labor this season, a coil of willow withs for basket repairs, a cone of dark Shanxi vinegar wrapped in reed. The captain signs a slip and tears it neatly. The cook breaks the cone with a hammer like someone setting free a smell. Oat noodles at noon bloom into appetite when the vinegar meets them. Hands move more cleanly afterward. Vinegar is not morale either, it is leverage. The afternoon is a climb measured in breaths and small arguments. The foreman insists on a tighter joint under a corner brick. The mason mutters about wind. Both accept the compromise a good trowel edge offers. You learn how a drain lip is persuaded to choose a line and keep it. You learn how a parapet tooth is made to look inevitable. Between courses, men pocket cakes like tools. A wauatu perches on a merlin for later and looks so much like a small stone that someone laughs and then pretends it was wind. Food watches for theft even when eyes do not. A rumor slides along the scaffold that the quartermaster has been swapping good oat for broomcorn sweepings. The captain spends an hour he cannot spare near the steamer and the scoop, saying nothing. The next round of cakes is firm, not hollow. A second rumor follows and cancels the first. Bread is its own audit. You bite fairness or you do not. By late day, the repaired stair has learned to keep its edge. The drain lip talks like water rather than complaint. The last lift of fill goes in with chaff and patience. The face takes a skim of lime that smells of yesterday's stone and tomorrow's weather. The wind loses interest and moves 2 ridges away to disturb another conversation. You heat the griddle one more time and slide on buckwheat crepes so thin they shiver. Scallion paste, a brush of vinegar. Men eat standing, cooling cakes in their palms, work gloves tucked in belts like punctuation. When the scaffold comes down, you see the line you made, and it looks older than it is, always the sign of a good repair. Nobody names pride. People name chores for morning. The quern sack is tucked tight. The ashwater bottle settles to make Juyong for dawn's dough. Oat straw is coiled and hung away from sparks. The vinegar cone's broken face is covered with a shard of crock and a cloth. The foreman scratches a mark on a brick he set himself, not a signature, only a reminder where to check after the first hard rain. Notice what survives the day's arithmetic. Cakes were thick enough that hands did not shake on ladders. The vinegar jar was generous enough that mouths did not go numb in wind. Chaff and husks were abundant enough to keep the wall from remembering winter too sharply. The ledger will say something like oat, buckwheat, salt, oil, vinegar issued, bricks, lime, sand consumed, parapet mended, drain recut. It will not say that bread prevented a quarrel, or that a bowl of noodle heat untied a node of fear, or that ash water kept dough together on an hour when men might not have been. There will be seasons when carts fail and cakes thin and the steamer complains in 2 notes. There will be mornings when wind turns faces grey and the captain holds fairness together with his hands. Most days will be like this one, unphotographed, exact, the color of grain and dust. The wall will learn the names of a few storms. It will never know the names of the cooks. Far from this ridge, crews in modern jackets break for steamed buns and instant noodles under scaffolds of a different metal. Thermoses pour tea darker than memory. Sauce packets stand in for jarred paste. A strip of protein hides in a roll, the way dried tofu once did. The nouns change slowly. The verbs do not. Scald, steam, slice, share, lift, set, seal, sleep. Work goes back to work because something warm and plain arrived on time. At dusk, the repaired crenel throws a new shadow that fits the old pattern. You sit with a cup of hot water stained brown by toasted buckwheat, and the husk pillow exhales a dry whisper into your neck. Wind troubles the tent flap without finding a way in. Across the camp, the steamer lid clicks as it cools. You think, not heroically but correctly, that the wall will sleep, and that your food made of short seasons and poor soils taught stone to rest. If a line cut by weather can be kept by cakes that hold together only when taught, what other structures in us, habits, tempers, vows, depend on small, regular heat and a plain taste returned at the same hour, so that emptiness does not decide the day. The ridge darkens until it has no edges, and the wall becomes a long breath moving once, then once again. Somewhere a kettle remembers to cool, a jar thinks in vinegar, a brick tastes faintly of rice, and a crust relaxes on a board while the night folds itself up like a quiet map.